In the previous episode, we covered the four major interpretive methods of the book of Revelation. And today, we're going to develop a fundamental understanding of the nature of prophecy. And by the end of this episode, you'll see why material preterism, or Satan's little season, falls short. But to understand prophecy, we need to take a look into what the Bible has already told us about prophecy. The problem with this is that it involves looking at parts of the Bible that often get overlooked or neglected, which are the ancient histories of Israel. You see, the prophets of old gave us all the interpretive keys that we need to understand prophecy, if we're willing to look closely. Let me give you an example. What do you think that the day of the Lord is? Is it the second coming of Yeshua, as the futurists suggest? Or is it the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 CE, as the preterists suggest? Now, what if I told you that both perspectives had some truth to them? Well, I hope that you enjoy this episode because today we're going to take a deep dive, and I think that you will be surprised and encouraged by what you see. To understand eschatological prophecy, we need to first acknowledge that prophecy, by nature and routine, is often dual or multiple in fulfillment. For example, the day of the Lord is not limited to just one occurrence. This day of the Lord comes on Babylon in Isaiah 13:6, Edomia in Obadiah 15, Israel in Amos 5, Judah in pre-captivity in Ezekiel 13:5, Joel 1 and 2, and Zephaniah 1, as well as post-captivity Judah and Malachi 4. So the day of the Lord comes at different times and in different places. So another example of the fact that prophecy can often be dual or multiple in fulfillment is how Joseph and Mary fled to Egypt. This is likened by Matthew, the gospel writer, to the prophecy found in Hosea 11:1, where it's applied literally to Israel. I'll show you the scriptures.
When Israel was a child, I loved him, and out of Egypt I called my son. Hosea 11:1.
The Hosea prophecy refers to when the children of Israel lived in Egypt, but were taken out of their bondage. Yet Matthew says that this prophecy was also fulfilled in Yeshua, after he had returned from spending some time in Egypt.
So he got up, took the child and his mother by night, and withdrew to Egypt, where he stayed until the death of Herod. This fulfilled what the Lord had spoken through the prophet, "Out of Egypt I called my son."
So its initial fulfillment applied to the exodus from Egypt, but a secondary or pattern type of fulfillment is applied to Yeshua when he came from Egypt. So prophecy can have several layers of fulfillment. This concept of dual or multiple fulfillment is how we understand many prophetic events in Scripture. Let me give you some more examples. The first and second comings of Yeshua are Messiah. All of the various Messiah types that we see throughout Scripture, like Adam and Joshua, Moses, David, all these figures prefiguring or foreshadowing something that our ultimate Messiah would do. What about the Moedim, which means the biblical feast days, such as Passover, pertaining to Yeshua's death, the Feast of First Fruits, pertaining to his resurrection, and the Festival of Pentecost, pertaining to the giving of the Holy Spirit. These all have multiple fulfillments or shadow pictures. We can also see how Babylon, as well as Gog and Magog, are characterized in a spiritual sense as the universal enemies of Israel. And this is seen over and over in prophecy, but it's also seen being physically fulfilled in history. John even had this concept when he wrote Revelation. He had this concept in his mind. See, in the physical, we can see Jeremiah in Jeremiah chapter 51 telling the children of Israel to flee Babylon in her judgment and return to the land of Israel, when Babylon would be conquered by the Medo-Persians in 539. This is the physical historical fulfillment of Jeremiah telling the children of Israel to flee.
Flee from the midst of Babylon, and each of you save his life. Do not be destroyed in her punishment, for this is the Lord's time of vengeance. He is going to render recompense to her. Babylon has been a golden cup in the hand of the Lord, intoxicating all the earth. The nations have drunk of her wine, therefore the nations are going mad. Suddenly Babylon has fallen and been broken. Wail over her. Jeremiah 51, 6-8.
But then in a spiritual fulfillment, John draws on this and uses the same symbolism of the enemy of God and the enemy of Israel, which is Babylon, to refer to spiritual forces of darkness, pointing to another fulfillment of the fall of Babylon in the end days. This is where we get this concept of Mystery Babylon going all the way back to this ancient Babylonian empire, even though John was living in the 1st century. So in Revelation 18, John declares this.
After this I saw another angel descending from heaven with great authority, and the earth was illuminated by his glory. And he cried out in a mighty voice, Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She has become a lair for demons and a haunt for every unclean spirit, every unclean bird, and every detestable beast. Revelation 18, verses 1-2.
I will address the coming kingdom that Yeshua speaks of in the gospel accounts. But first, I want to point out something important. We must always go back to what came before to verify if our interpretation of a new thing is correct. If our interpretation of a gospel account, or say the words of Yeshua where he's talking about this imminent coming kingdom, if those words contradict the words of a prophet, or the Torah for that matter, then our interpretation of what Yeshua is talking about must be wrong. You see, in Luke 4:16-20, Yeshua reads from the scroll of Isaiah and declares that the scriptures were fulfilled by him. Now the caveat here is that he is reading from Isaiah 61 verse 1 and 2, and the custom at the time is to read at least 3 verses. Interestingly, Yeshua does not uphold this Mishnaic tradition. Nonetheless, Yeshua read verse 1 and only half of verse 2. Yeshua here indicates that at this time he's come to fulfill the first half of Isaiah 61:2, namely, to proclaim the year of Yahweh's favor. He leaves out the second half, which includes the day of vengeance of our God. The building of the physical kingdom after the days of vengeance takes place in the historical and covenantally promised land of Israel. See Genesis 13 and 15. And this is where the ancient ruins are, as Isaiah speaks of in Isaiah 61. The phrase ancient ruins is consistent with how the prophet Ezekiel described the physical locations of the temple and holy city. Not only are the physical locations of the millennial temple located in the historic lands, but there is direct indication that they have been devastated for many generations, and that Yeshua came only to fulfill the year of Yahweh's favor and not the days of vengeance. In other words, these days of vengeance that precede this physical coming of the kingdom to earth must occur after many generations of desolation. But in the 1st century, when Yeshua spoke these words, the city was not desolate. Therefore, this rebuilding that comes later must happen after another desolation, followed by many generations. And this makes sense considering the fact that Yeshua said that there would be an abomination of desolation to come, followed by a time in which the holy site was being trampled upon by the Gentiles, and that this time of the Gentiles would remain until the fullness of the Gentiles came in. So, in other words, this time of vengeance that occurs right before the coming kingdom has to happen after many generations of desolation and just doesn't quite fit the picture of the 1st century. Now, preterists will claim that it does fit. They will say that the days surrounding 70 CE were the days of vengeance wherein God would reign immediately thereafter. But this cannot be the case, because the rebuilding of the temple by God's hand should occur after many generations of desolation. If it were destroyed in 70 CE and the millennial reign began that same year, or let's just say 3 years later in 73, like the material preterists say, then how could one characterize only 3 years of desolation as the same thing as many generations? How does it qualify as ancient ruins, as Isaiah 61:2 describes them, if it's only been 3 years? Further, why would Yahweh come to defeat his enemies in 70 CE and then wait 3 whole years while the temple ruins lay desolate before rebuilding them? What is more fitting for the desolation preceding these days of vengeance is the period we now live in, wherein the ancient ruins of the temple have lain desolate for hundreds upon hundreds of years and many generations. Now, there is an important point to make. I'll grant that Luke says that the devastations of the coming destruction of Jerusalem that occur in 70 CE, he says they are the days of vengeance. He says this in Luke chapter 21, verse 22. It is true that the 70 CE destruction of Jerusalem does count as the days of vengeance, but not the ultimate days of vengeance. We can prove that there are more than one days of vengeance by simply looking at what Hosea prophesied, just like how we looked at the day of the Lord had more than one fulfillment. So does the days of vengeance have more than one fulfillment. See what Hosea says in chapter 9, verse 7.
The days of vengeance are come, the days of thy recompense are come, and Israel shall be afflicted as the prophet that is mad, as a man deranged. By reason of the multitude of thine iniquities thy madness has abounded. Hosea 9:7.
The Greek word in the Septuagint for the word vengeance used here is ekdikasis, which is the same Greek word used in Luke 21:22. Hosea predicted the Assyrian invasion and captivity of Israel, and he later lived to see these prophecies fulfilled in 723 BCE. Isaiah, his contemporary, did the same, when in the 740s BCE he warned of the impending destruction of Jerusalem and captivity of Judah at the hands of the Babylonians, which occurred in 587 BC.
What will you do for the day of vengeance and for the tumult that comes from a distance? Isaiah 10:3.
The word for vengeance in Hebrew is pekudah and is sometimes translated visitation or punishment. Jeremiah uses the same word to describe the day of visitation or pekudah coming upon Judah, in which the people of Anathoth, who conspired against Jeremiah, would specifically come to ruin. Anathoth is a Levitical city in Benjamin. We see this phrase again in reference to Babylon's crushing victory over Egypt, and in this case it is a reference to the Lord's Day, or the Day of Yahweh. This was fulfilled in 605 BCE when Nebuchadnezzar II defeated the Egyptian army at Carchemish. Consequently, we've seen 5 separate and distinct days of vengeance from the scriptures above. And previously, we saw 5 separate and distinct uses of Day of the Lord. So, we can confidently conclude that these phrases do not correspond to one singular usage or one single event, but rather they correspond to a thematic description, a theme that describes something. Now, these charts that I'm about to show you again, they're not exhaustive lists, but they're a helpful guide to understanding the thematic usage of these phrases in biblical prophecy. There are several comings and days of the Lord as shadows and types, but only one second coming of Messiah and one consummate day of Yahweh. It is important that we realize that the Bible regularly uses metaphorical and allegorical descriptive language in repetitive and cyclical fashion. The reader should be paying attention to themes rather than single-use depictions regarding these kinds of descriptors. Limiting these descriptors into single-use depictions does violence to the intended meaning of the text and leads to the development of aberrant doctrines such as full preterism and material preterism. With this in mind, Bible students can accept that many of Yeshua's words in the Olivet Discourse can pertain to the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 CE, and other things that he said can pertain to the ultimate or consummate day of Yahweh. 70 CE can be seen as a lesser apocalypse, and Yeshua gives John revelation regarding a greater apocalypse to come in the age of the spiritual temple, or the body of Messiah.
Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called children of God.
Has Armageddon already occurred? This is a serious question because if you're a preterist, especially a full preterist or a material preterist, you have to believe that this great battle of Armageddon already occurred because it precedes the millennium, and if we're already in the millennium, then Armageddon already happened. So if we're going to look at when Armageddon happened, it's important that we look at how the prophets describe Armageddon and see if it fits. Now, it's important that we review Ezekiel chapters 37 through 47, which described this great battle immediately preceding the millennium, and is colloquially known as the Battle of Armageddon. These chapters in Ezekiel also describe the millennial temple and the city, as well as several geographic landmarks. Now, we can be sure that Armageddon has not already occurred and that the millennial kingdom is still yet to come. We can also know that the city of Zion, which is Jerusalem, will be located in the historic geographic location of Israel, like the Bible describes, not some made-up place at the North Pole that material preterists describe. Now, full preterists believe that the millennial kingdom was solely a spiritual event that has already occurred. They are forced to accept that the descriptions given by Ezekiel are merely spiritual allegories and did not physically happen. Material preterists, however, do believe that the millennial reign has already occurred, but they believe that Ezekiel's physical descriptors should be taken literally, not metaphorically or allegorically. They theorize that the city of Zion is located at the North Pole, surrounded by unsurpassable ice walls. They are forced to either ignore the passages in Ezekiel or to assert that the geographic locations given by Ezekiel are not the historic locations that we know to be true today. They must say that these locations have been misconstrued by satanic forces in an attempt to confuse modern Bible students. In other words, what we've believed about Bible locations is actually a lie. So, I would like to take a moment and review some of these descriptions given by Ezekiel. Because Ezekiel's descriptions are given over several chapters, it doesn't make sense for me to read all of those chapters to you. But what I'll do is I'll provide a list and the references for where these items can be found, and you can read these chapters for yourself. Let's get started. Number 1, Gog attacks Israel from the north. Now, attacking from the north doesn't logically follow if the New Zion is hidden beyond the North Pole area, as is frequently claimed by material preterists. Its armies include those from Iran, Ethiopia, Libya, and North Africa. Now, these are the nations that surround historic Israel. It's hardly an image of worldwide confrontation upon a holy city beyond the North Pole, as the Satan's Little Season or material preterists suggest. 2. The holy people are referred to as a people living without walls, bars, or gates. Now, this is a colloquialism, but it wouldn't make sense for there to be a giant ice wall preventing free travel to Zion if this is how the people or the holy people are described. And there are no security measures or treaties to prevent access to Zion. In fact, it's described as living at the navel of the world. And historically and biblically, this is the land of Israel as we know it. Number 3, the prince has sons with inheritances. This implies that the prince is actually a representative of the throne of David and not the Messiah. In other prophets, Messiah Yeshua is referred to as king and not prince. Yet in Ezekiel, David is referred to as both king and prince. Furthermore, Ezekiel 45:22 says the prince will offer a sin offering for himself and the people. So this cannot be referring to Yeshua the Messiah, but rather a resurrected David or perhaps a man sitting on the throne of David, representing the nation of Israel under Messiah Yeshua's authority. Now, Daniel 9:8 and Hosea 3:4 distinguish between kings, princes, and leaders. Thus, a prince is subordinate to King Yeshua is fitting. 4. Gog's weapons will be burned as fuel for 7 years. The children of Israel will bury their bodies for 7 months. The location of the burial site will be a common traveler's route in Israel in a valley east of the sea known to Ezekiel during his time. This means this was something known to Ezekiel during his time, an actual historic geographic location, not the North Pole. Number 5. The millennial temple has a river that flows eastward, which turns the Dead Sea into fresh water, according to Ezekiel 47:1. This river begins from the south side of the temple, which faces eastward, and runs east but splits into 2 rivers. One goes east to the Dead Sea, and the other goes west to the Mediterranean Sea. This is not compatible with an assertion that the millennial kingdom exists anywhere other than the historic land of Israel, which is exactly between the Mediterranean Sea and the Dead Sea. Also, if the millennium has already come, then why has the Dead Sea gone back from being alive to dead again? Did the river of life flowing from the temple dry up, as found in Ezekiel 47? As you can see from these descriptions, the partial preterist really has to allegorize a lot of things, including the Dead Sea coming back to life. Yet we can look at the Dead Sea today and see that it's still the Dead Sea. So you have to over-spiritualize this concept, even though the passage is describing an historic location between 2 actual seas. 6. The Mediterranean Sea, which is the Great Sea to the west, and the Dead Sea, which is the Eastern Sea, as well as Damascus, the Jordan River, Gilead, Tamar, Meribah Kadesh, the Brook of Egypt, which is Wadi el Arish, the Jordan Valley, and several other locations are mentioned in describing the borders of Israel during the millennium. This is chapter 47, verses 15 through 20. 7. Ezekiel chapters 47 and 48 also describe the holy district and land portions using location descriptions such as the Mediterranean Sea, Damascus, Egypt, etc. 8. This place will be resettled on the rebuilt ruins of its former form. It will be cultivated rather than desolate and trodden upon by the nations, as is spoken of Ezekiel 36:11 and 33 through 35. So what this means is, if it's resettled on its former ruins, you can't have a situation where the historic location of Israel is being talked about throughout the Bible, but then when you get to the millennium, all of a sudden it's moved locations to somewhere else at the North Pole. No, they have to be in the same place because this millennial city is resettled on the rebuilt ruins of its former form. It's reestablishing the ruins. 9. Ezekiel 37:25 and Isaiah 33:20 stipulate that when we are resurrected at the second coming of Messiah, we will be taken to Israel, which is the land of the patriarchs, and we are to dwell there forever. This ensures us there will not be a time where we are taken from Israel and moved to another location, whether that be a hidden place on earth or in heaven.
They shall dwell in the land that I gave to my servant Jacob, where your fathers lived. They and their children and their children's children shall dwell there forever, and David my servant shall be their prince forever. Ezekiel 37:25. Behold Zion, the city of our appointed feasts. Your eyes will see Jerusalem, an untroubled habitation, an immovable tent, whose stakes will never be plucked up, nor will any of its cords be broken. Isaiah 33:20.
Now, I want to make a very important point here about rain and the Feast of Booths or Tabernacles. Zechariah chapter 14 and Daniel chapter 7 very clearly stipulate that Yeshua's kingdom, when he establishes it on earth, will be an everlasting kingdom which shall not pass away or be destroyed, and that every nation which does not pay tribute at the Feast of Booths will not receive rainfall. Now, Isaiah 33:20 stipulates that Zion will not be moved or uprooted. This means that if the millennial kingdom is global, then it will remain global. You cannot move its tent pegs. You cannot diminish this kingdom. If this kingdom is an immutable global kingdom, then the decrees of the king are immutable and global as well. Therefore, if we are living in the time of Satan's little season, as material preterists suggest, then we should see no rain on any land outside of the kingdom, because there is no nation on earth that faithfully maintains the Feast of Booths. We experience frequent rainfall globally. Therefore, we have evidence that we are not living in Satan's little season, and the millennium has not yet come. But wait, material preterists will try and get around this, and they'll say, well, you see, Messiah's kingdom doesn't rule over the whole earth. He's just at the North Pole. So because we're in Satan's little season, this rule doesn't apply. We can get rainfall because we're in this deception time. However, we just very clearly stipulated that the kingdom cannot move, it cannot be diminished, and it is everlasting. This time of Satan's little season is not a time when God's kingdom is put out on the earth, or extinguished, or diminished. That will never happen because his kingdom is immutable and global. See, the material preterists are trying to make the Satan season out to be this 250-year period where basically Satan rules the world and Christ is hidden away. But that's just not how the scriptures describe it. The scriptures describe his millennial kingdom as a global, immutable kingdom, followed with and by a tiny little rebellious mutiny when Satan is released from his cave, so to say, to come out and make one final battle against the king. So, his decrees are immutable, and we should not see any rainfall on any land outside of the kingdom in a place where the Feast of Booths or the Feast of Tabernacles is not faithfully kept. Another very important point to make is that Zechariah chapter 14 also asserts that the wealth of the nations will be gathered into Zion during the millennium. That means all the wealth, all the gold, all the treasures of the nations of the world will be gathered in to Messiah's kingdom. Therefore, if we're living in a time following the millennium, we would not see vast amounts of wealth or storehouses of gold and precious gems or museums showcasing priceless jewelry. We wouldn't see massive accumulation of wealth belonging to separate and often warring entities, nations, and various individuals. Rather, all that wealth would have been initially received into Messiah's kingdom, and portions of newly accumulated goods would be continually paid to his kingdom in the form of tribute. So it just doesn't make sense that we would see all these riches, dispersed around the entire earth if those things were supposed to be gathered into the millennial kingdom. Furthermore, Isaiah chapter 66 lists a requirement for all mankind to bow down before him on a weekly and monthly basis. Every nation will be subject, and there will be no people group which does not know the glory of God. This fact, taken at face value, limits the time of Satan's deception to a mere 6 days. If Satan's season lasts longer than 6 days, then there would be a faction of mankind that does not bow down to worship Yahweh on the Sabbath, and this would immediately trigger retribution from a king who is said to rule with a rod of iron in Revelation 19:15. As we can see, the physical descriptions of the millennium given by Ezekiel cannot be reconciled with the material preterist theory, also known as Satan's little season, which asserts that the millennium already took place and that Zion is at the North Pole. Partial and full preterism also fall short because these theories require that we hyper-spiritualize everything Ezekiel said, as if there was no real millennial temple and no Messiah ruling and reigning from Zion on the earth. Now, the futurists and historicists do apply a proper hermeneutic. Now, hermeneutic is a proper method of Bible study. So they apply a proper hermeneutic to the text of Ezekiel by viewing it as future and as a literal event that will take place. This makes sense. So as we progress through our study of prophecy, we will now begin to look at chronology, the study of time, and perhaps we can answer the big question that preterists so often propose. Here it is. If Jesus said he was coming quickly, then why have we been waiting 2,000 years?